Well, I didn't expect to be discussing this again, but old Dan Crenshaw is at it again. I just did, a bit on him a couple days ago, and all this, nonsense he was spouting about how anyone who questions the $38 billion recently sent in aid to the state of Israel is, of course, a Holocaust denier, which, total non sequitur, is also just, defamatory. Because obviously there are plenty of Americans on the left and the right who are not anti-Semitic, who are normal, ordinary Americans, who have trouble making ends meet, who are wondering why they are paying taxes to Washington, to the federal government, every year, and having trouble paying their mortgage, and then having that money that they worked so hard to earn just shipped over and sent to Jerusalem. So someone, I guess, in a follow-up at another event that Dan Crenshaw was doing, or maybe it was also at Texas A&M. I think he was doing 2 events there, so this might be from the second event. And this one was not outside like the first one. This seemed to be in some kind of an auditorium. And he was asked about these recent laws that have been passed, both by Congress and by the state of Florida. And this is of particular interest to me since I live in Florida and go to a public university here. The state of Florida recently passed a law that essentially, they call it an anti-Semitism bill, saying that, we're banning anti-Semitism on campus, so both in public schools and public universities. You're not allowed to say anything that we consider anti-Semitic. Of course, their definition of anti-Semitism doesn't really have that much to do with Jews. I mean, obviously, it has... it includes the part about, being nasty towards Jewish people, but it also includes, questioning American foreign policy with regard to the state of Israel and criticizing, Israeli government policy. And so where I live, it is illegal for me to, while on campus, criticize a particular foreign government. In the land of the free, I'm not even permitted to criticize, a government that isn't even my own. I mean, it would be bad enough if it was the American government telling me I'm not allowed to criticize it, which they kind of are, because, my criticisms would largely be tied to American foreign policy, but with respect to the state of Israel. But, hey, we're just not allowed to do that, because if you question that, well, then, why are you wanting to have the freedom to say things like that? Are you a hater? Do you hate Jews? Are you an anti-Semite, even though, most Jews are not really even Semitic, since they're not from the Middle East for the most part? It's not like the Jewish people I know even speak a Semitic language, Jewish people I know are, descended of Europeans, and they speak English. But anyway, leaving the problems with the specific term anti-Semitism aside, the state of Florida was not alone in passing a bill like this. The U.S. Congress passed, what was called an anti-BDS bill, anti-boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, which banned any government contractor or employee from anyone who's taking taxpayer money for their salary from supporting a boycott of Israel. And this was done on the grounds that, well, the only reason why someone would want to boycott Israel is because they just hate Jews. And so we're not going to have taxpayer money employ anyone who hates Jews, and that's the way they spun this. But of course, again, this is just a way of stifling criticism of the Israeli government. And so now, if you want to hold a government job, in the United States, you have to swear a loyalty oath, which, any loyalty oaths are pretty creepy, even if you're swearing it, to the American government, which is not to be conflated with the U.S. Constitution. That's a little different. But anyway, these people are forced to sign a loyalty oath, essentially, to Israel, which says, hey, I'm not going to boycott Israel. I'll buy Israeli products, which I don't even know what's made in Israel. I guess, IWI or IDI. Whatever the name of the gun company is over there, I guess they send stuff here, like Jerichos and Galils. But other than that, I've honestly never seen a product that, said that was stamped "Made in Israel" on it. So it seems like a pretty silly thing to even worry about someone wanting to boycott Israel, because, what opportunities does, someone living in the United States really have to boycott Israel? And so anyway, getting back to Dan Crenshaw and the questioner asked Dan Crenshaw about these 2 laws and said, hey, these are both flagrant violations of freedom of speech. They go against the spirit of the First Amendment, which is that everyone should be able to say whatever they want, and that the government should not be imposing its preferences on people and making them only say things that the government wants. The whole point of the First Amendment is that the government doesn't try and influence people's speech, that rather the people are able to use their speech to influence the government. And so therefore, instead of the government imposing its view of Israel on the American people are supposed to be imposing their view of Israel or any other political matter on the federal government. That's how this whole democracy thing is supposed to work, isn't it? That the ordinary people are the ones who have political authority, right? And that is delegated to people like Dan Crenshaw, and that his job is to carry out the will of ordinary people. And the only way he will know their will is if they have the right to freely express themselves, right? Isn't that how this whole thing is supposed to work? Now, obviously, I don't buy into that. I think that's a fairy tale. I think it's a fiction. But situations like this are very good to me from the perspective, from the perspective that this will, red pill normies into understanding that the government is not your friend, and that democracy has nothing to do with the people being in charge, but rather the people being pacified. And so Dan Crenshaw was asked to denounce these flagrant violations of free speech, and he absolutely refused. In fact, he was indignant. He got angry at the questioner. He had the gall to get upset at this person for being concerned about freedom of speech in America at a time when it's being eroded. And he accused the questioner of being an anti-Semite himself and cloaking his anti-Semitism in the banner of the First Amendment and freedom of speech, saying that essentially the only reason why he cared about freedom of speech is because he wanted to say, mean words. Which of course is why the First Amendment exists, Dan. I hate to break it to you, but nobody needs a constitutional right codified in your founding document in order to say things that the government approves of. You need that sort of amendment, that sort of codified right in the Constitution, so that you may say things that the government doesn't want you to say, so that the government doesn't have the ability to impose its will on you and say, no, you're not allowed to say that. That's wrong thing. And Dan Crenshaw then went on further to imply things that were not stated at all, and accused the questioner of being a BDS supporter. And of course, being a BDS supporter is like the same thing as being a Nazi sympathizer or a Red or something like that. It's just it's one of these little things that's supposed to dehumanize you and make you sound like, oh, you're one of the enemy. And to me, this kind of shows where Dan Crenshaw's loyalties lie, because from an American perspective, the BDS movement is neither friend nor foe. Because the BDS movement has nothing really to do with America. It has much more to do with Israel, because that's who they're trying to boycott. So, if you're an American, you may support or oppose it. It doesn't really matter, because it has to do with, your opinion of Israel, not of America. But, the fact that Dan Crenshaw thinks that, a good American, can only have one position, and that is that they oppose boycotting Israel, well, then, that seems to indicate to me that Dan Crenshaw thinks that, a good American, by definition, holds some kind of dual loyalty, between both the United States and Israel. And that, frankly, loyalties to these countries are one and the same. That in order to be a good American, you must be loyal to Israel, and in order to be a good Israeli, you must be loyal to America, I'm sure he would think. And this obviously is a disgusting sort of perspective, from my opinion, saying that somehow, because frankly, I'm not even loyal to the American government when they do things that I disagree with, because, hey, we're supposed to have freedom of speech here, and I'm supposed to be able to say whatever I want and be able to disagree with my government, because we do have this great big democratic republic that the media loves to tell us about. Remember the democracy that Donald Trump wanted to destroy, all that stuff? I mean, hey, I'm just defending democracy. And Dan Crenshaw here, this fascist Republican, he's trying to stifle democracy. And so, yeah, I didn't mention before, but all this is still tied back into the Groyper War and the Knickers, led by General Nick Fuentes. I have to say, it's pretty remarkable that within 3 weeks of them trying to take on Conservatism Inc., we're already to the point where they're just saying, no. We just need to ban people criticizing Israel altogether. That's not covered under the First Amendment. You're not allowed to do that. They've gone from ignoring these